morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. So yesterday I released the results video for the BTT poll of top 10 movies of 2013, where you got to vote for your favorites. And the list turned out to be almost exclusively blockbusters, with one exception, 12 Years a Slave, which just made it onto the list at number 10. And while most of you were very happy with the results, fantastic, some people expressed disappointment in the comment section with the voters for not picking smaller, more independent films, the kind of movies that we're hearing a lot about now that it's award season. And I really felt that that disappointment was unfair. It was unjust to place it on the voters. And if you want to put your disappointment anywhere, it should really be in Hollywood, which is one of the two reasons I think you don't see smaller films on the list that I want to get into. I'm also going to tell you the numbers 11 through 20 because I think you'll see some surprises in there with some smaller films that almost made the top 10. So with Hollywood, I think the disappointment is that they continue to just go for the easy money, and that's the blockbuster. They know that they can advertise the hell out of it. They release it in 4,000 theaters now. It's impossible not to be able to see these movies if you want to, or even if you don't particularly want to. They're just so pushed in audiences' faces, and the ad campaigns are so pervasive that they get huge audiences, and a lot of people see them as a result. Now, these smaller films, I think Hollywood does not push them as much as they could. They get very poor distribution. We've been talking for weeks now about how Saving Mr. Banks has really not even had a chance. And they open it in very small theaters. When an independent film goes wide, it opens in around 1,200 theaters, under 2,000, as opposed to, that's less than half of what the big blockbusters are opening in. And for instance, also, a lot of them don't even open wide during the year that they're qualifying for awards. For instance, Her opened in limited release just to make sure it could qualify for awards season this year, but because it's such a crowded schedule, it's not going wide till this coming weekend. Now, money-wise, again, easy money, that's a smart play because Her, there's hardly any movies coming out. For instance, only The Legend of Hercules comes out this weekend, so both Her and Lone Survivor are taking advantage of that, releasing with very little competition, and also they're going to use their awards buzz to kind of, give them an extra push, and audiences will want to go to the movies and see there's nothing playing except for Kellen Lutz and Hercules, and say, well, maybe we should check out Her or Lone Survivor. So it's a system that even though these films are big awards contenders and critics have seen them, and so critics can put them on their top 10 lists, you have a situation where a lot of audience members simply haven't seen these smaller films. Now, the other thing is the very unfortunate reality of budgetary concerns. I've seen a number of you express this in the comment sections. I'm allowed to write off my movie tickets for taxes because it's a business expense, but people just don't have an infinite amount of money to spend on movie tickets. They have these great passes over in Europe that I've been hearing about where for a flat fee, you can go to the movies for as many times as you want for a monthly period, I believe it is, and maybe eventually they'll establish something like that here in the United States. But when people have a limited budget, they're going to save that ticket money for the movie that demands the big screen. And again, that's the blockbuster. So, if Hollywood maybe could have two price ranges, they could experiment with that. But when they're asking for the same money for, let's use again, Her versus, let's say, Man of Steel, even though Her might be the better film, you could see Her on the small screen and you would still have an enjoyable experience. I don't think it would take away from the film, especially some of the impressive TV setups people have these days. But with Man of Steel, you really want to see that in the big screen. That's also, again, blockbusters are also a shared experience. People want to go to the theater with a lot of people. They want to have the excitement of being online, the anticipation of the movie, hearing the audience's reaction with them, going with their friends. It's an immediacy. It's an event. And smaller films just haven't been able to create that event status. So if Hollywood wants people to go and see these smaller films in theaters, they need to distribute them wider, maybe make them a little cheaper, or figure out something with this price point, because it just really puts smaller films at a disadvantage. All right, so let me tell you the 11 through 20 were on the list. All right, so almost making the list, I think a lot of you would be really happy with this, is American Hustle. That came in at number 11. So it was so close. So 12 Years a Slave and American Hustle and Gravity are really some audience favorites with you guys. Then, as I noted in the results video, two animation films almost made the list. Despicable Me 2 came in at number 12. Frozen beat them out to actually make the list. And then Monsters University was number 13. So those films they actually so far have made more money. I think Frozen at this point will surpass Monsters University, but I don't think it might be able to surpass Despicable Me 2, and that would be just amazing if it were. Despicable Me 2 is almost at $1 billion. But you guys really liked those movies as well. Then at number 14 was World War Z. This was a big surprise. I thought not only was I was surprised at seeing Iron Man 3 do so well on the top 10 list. It came in at number 5 because people expressed so much disappointment online for these films. And people had said so many things, negative things about World War Z. It seems, and also I feel like the negative voices usually rise to the top. Even myself, I'm like when I'm thinking about good things, I'm like, okay, well that's great. I don't need to pay attention to that. Let it go. It's doing fine. We need to focus on the problem. So I think that happens sometimes, and I think you should always keep that in mind when you're listening to feedback and commentary, even just like from the general consensus. I think usually the content tend to stay quiet. So even though there were a ton of complaints about World War Z, you guys still voted at number 14. Then at number 15 was Fast 6. So that was really interesting to see that franchise. It was also interesting not to see it make the top 10, even though it's so successful. It's one of the highest grossing films of the year. I think it's currently the 4th highest grossing film of the year. But I think The Hobbit will probably surpass it soon. But still, very impressive that it made number 15 for you guys. Now here's a small film that almost made it. Despite its poor distribution, you put Saving Mr. Banks at number 16. So that was a nice surprise, and I'm glad that people who are finding the movie are enjoying it. As you know, remember, it's my favorite movie of the year. Then number 17, another surprise, The Great Gatsby. Another movie a lot of people complained about. There was very vocal dissenters, but it clearly has its fans. It did very well for Warner Brothers. It helped make them the most successful studio box office-wise worldwide for the year. And again, you put Great Gatsby at number 17. Then The Wolverine was number 18. Some of you were saying, where's The Wolverine? I can't believe it didn't make the top 10. Well, it made the top 20. The Wolverine was number 18. I think that's definitely a comeback for Fox. I think the First Class and The Wolverine, they still haven't quite hit their sweet spot yet. They're still not at X2 territory. That's why they're not making the top 10. But they're clawing their way back. Then at number 19, The Conjuring. This made my top 10 list. This was again for Warner Brothers, another very successful film like The Great Gatsby. Tremendously profitable because it was so cheap. And I think really a fantastic horror film. Almost up there with The Shining. Really well made and well crafted. And I remember this was one that had a lot of positive feedback. So I'm sure there was some surprise it didn't make your top 10. But it made the top 20 again, so number 19. And then number 20, which was very, very interesting to me, was Captain Phillips. This is a movie that has just come out of left field, I think, in terms of its audience appeal. Audiences have really enjoyed it, although Tom Hanks does know what he's doing when picking scripts. He has 2 movies here, Saving Mr. Banks and Captain Phillips. He's an extremely likable actor. That's part of his, not only his appeal and his longevity as a movie star, but also his worth, monetary worth to the studios. Audiences just like him. Never underestimate likability in a movie star. And also, this film is doing quite well with awards. The Directors Guild have put their nominations out. Paul Greengrass made the list. He's also nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Director, which I think is very interesting because I think Paul Greengrass did a very, it was a well-directed film. Well, actually, it was a Paul Greengrass film. He did his usual stuff. But I think where Paul Greengrass really shined here was casting real Somalis in the role of the Somali pirates. I think that made all the difference for the movie. I'm so glad to see Barkhad Abdi getting nominated himself. He was the lead pirate, getting nominated for supporting actor roles, both for SAG nominations and also Golden Globes. Maybe he'll even win one, but the nomination in itself is a tremendous achievement. So I think Paul Greengrass, his insistence on reality is, I think, his hallmark and what serves this film so well. But I wouldn't, it's typical Paul Greengrass. I don't really think he personally really, pushed the edge of the envelope anywhere. And I do think some of the parts of the film lagged a little bit. So I am impressed to see so much support for Captain Phillips. Very, very interesting indeed. Although, if you might remember my video with Asa, the wish list video for, Batman Superman 2015, one of the things we talked about was that Paul Greengrass would maybe be a great comic book director for a comic book movie because of the reality he brings to it. And if you could apply that to the fantastic, it would be really interesting. So, but I don't know. If he with all these nominations, he's a very politically minded guy. It'll be interesting to see what he chooses as his next project because he's going to have his pick. So that's the first story of the day. I put up a list here so you can see the top 20 because it's hard to always remember what I said. All right. So first story of the day. Second story of the day concerns Lucasfilm. And it's leaked that Disney, well, not leaked, one of the people on their Lucasfilm, that's called the Lucasfilm Story Group, one of the people on that team has been tweeting that Disney is really insisting through Lucasfilm that Star Wars get its canon in order. Now, George Lucas of course, we're all very happy that he created Star Wars. We're very grateful. I think a lot of us wish that he would have created it and then let it go. But, like a lot of people with their toys, he, very protective of it and, really wanted to keep it to himself. But I think his housekeeping in Star Wars, while he let it thrive, was a little sloppy. And basically the idea was that he let these Star Wars universe be expanded through comics and books and video games. But at the end of the day, when he made his prequels and such, he just wrote whatever he wanted because, I think that's a mistake. And I think it's indicative of George Lucas as a creative individual and why I think Star Wars is riddled with problems, even though the core idea is so powerful that it can overcome those problems and still be a very popular property. But Disney's like, no, we have to get our house in order. So they have a team of people together in this Lucasfilm Story Group, and they are making a solid, singular canon, which all the going forward, everything will have to draw from. And this actually is interesting to me. It reminds me when I wrote some manga for Blizzard through Tokyo Pop before that American manga company went out of business. What happened was every time I did a story, I had to go through the Blizzard Story Group. I wrote for both Warcraft and StarCraft. And I had to, they gave me homework. I had to read books that had also been in canon that had been written for the characters that I was going to be portraying. They had to tell me like what planets I could use. And if I said, for instance, I said I wanted to do this type of story, they would be like, okay, well here in the universe that we already have, these are the characters that could apply to that perhaps. And also every story I wrote 3 stories, I believe, they had to go through and fact check them, and not only for make sure for quality, but also that they played into the universe. And it was, a very it took a lot of time, and it was, very exacting, and it required some rewrites and stuff. You had to write within the confines, although any licensing gig is the same way. But I think at the end of the day, it pays off, and Blizzard has some very well-crafted universes, and the cohesiveness, I think, pays off for them because everything ties back into the games. And I think that, Disney wants everything to tie back into the movies. They really want to just funnel that into the merchandise, obviously, as well. Yes, that's so interesting when you think about it. George Lucas built his empire on the money off of the merchandise because Fox didn't realize the value of that when they let him have it, and now it's gone. A company has gotten their hands on it finally. So it'll be, it'll be interesting to see if Disney takes that Lucasfilm merchandise money and reinvests it into the company as George Lucas did, or if they start playing and putting it in different parts of Disney, the Disney empire. But anyway, I think this is very interesting. They're obviously word is they're going to be cutting some characters. So I don't follow Star Wars largely because I think their canon is just a giant, like tangle of knots. I don't think it has good through lines to pull you in. But that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people read this stuff and has a lot of fans. So I'm interested, for those of you who are into the Star Wars canon, who do you want to make sure doesn't get cut? Who has to be saved? Who should go on to the movies? Who would you like maybe to see in the movies? If they're consolidating the canon like this, perhaps they're going to draw on it and allude to it in the movies. So let me know what you think should stay and what do you think should go in the comment section down below. So that's the second story of the day. The third story of the day is that, of course, I talked about how successful Frozen has been. The soundtrack, on Monday I reported that the soundtrack is doing incredibly well. It topped the Billboard 200 chart after coming in at number 18. It climbed all the way to the top. And as a result, another Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson-Lopez, the music and lyrics duo behind Frozen and also Avenue Q and Book of Mormon, it looks like another project of theirs in Hollywood will be moving forward as a result, and that's Bob the Musical. And it's basically about an ordinary guy who has some kind of hits his head, some kind of accident, and suddenly finds himself living in a musical. And he's not a big fan of musicals. So actually, Bob, I could probably relate to Bob. I'm not a fan of musicals, particularly Broadway musicals. I don't like the Broadway sound, which is one of the problems I had with Frozen. And so this is a project I wouldn't be incredibly excited for, although I do think that the humor could really be what pulls me in. And at one point, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, I think that's their names, the 21 Jump Street Lego team, they were on this for a while. So it seems to have some humor in it. But they picked a director, which I think downgrades the project. They've picked, let's see here, Alan Loeb. Alan Loeb directed Rock of Ages. Rock of Ages actually wasn't that bad. I watched it on demand. It had some good moments in it. I have a problem with musicals that are just retreads, so like they just take the classic, the hits from the radio and they re-sing them. That said, the Rock of Ages had some good performances in it, particularly Tom Cruise, by the way. Tom Cruise is going to come up in the viewer question in a moment. So anyway, so Rock of Ages was okay. But then this guy, Alan Loeb, most of his resume is from Adam Sandler. He did Just Go With It, the Adam Sandler, Jennifer Aniston romantic comedy, which really is on the line of, good, bad. And then also, Here Comes the Boom with Kevin James. Now that was actually also a somewhat entertaining movie, but it was a very television-like. It really wasn't something you needed to see in theaters. I didn't see it in theaters, even though I did enjoy it. So I think that when you have something like this, you should get someone like Mark Webb, 500 Days of Summer. I mean, the routine he does with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who sees himself as Han Solo in the car reflection, and the band and that big number, was very inventive and helped get Mark Webb the Spider-Man gig. So I would think they would be better off finding an indie director who really wants to prove himself, rather than someone who I feel, is better suited to television, or these like straight, bolt the camera down comedies that Adam Sandler and company make. So, but anyway, I'm curious to know if the Robert and Kristen Anderson-Lopez duo is enough to sell this to you, or are you so in love with Frozen that you're like, I want to see what they do next? And I have to admit, Avenue Q and Book of Mormon are very popular comedic musicals on Broadway, and perhaps this will actually, because Frozen doesn't have any humor in it, perhaps that's why, that kind of tied one arm behind the Lopez's back. Maybe being able to be free to do what this seems like a comedy, they'll be able to really shine and do a soundtrack, a score, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm not a theater person, and be able to really provide what they do for Broadway so successfully for the big screen. So Bob the Musical, it's almost certainly going to move ahead considering Frozen's success. All right, so today's viewer question. I can't say the YouTube handle because it's in Hebrew, but luckily he signed his name Nitzan, or Nitzan, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but from Israel. And yesterday I asked everybody how the weather was where they were, and Nitzan says, hello from Israel. We are experiencing bright but cold days. Not as cold as you, though. It's all over the news here, so it's very cold in Israel as well. The biggest worry here is that we won't get enough rain for winter. So I hope that's not the case, Nitzan. I hope everything works out over there. So Nitzan says, I have a viewer queue. Is this the place? Yes, some of you have been asking me where to ask viewer questions. You should ask them in morning movie news videos. I mean, I look at them everywhere, but this is the best place. This is where I go when I'm looking for questions, to the latest video. So Nitzan says, I love Josh Hutcherson in The Hunger Games, but doesn't it worry anyone that he is shorter than Jennifer Lawrence? Good question. I think this has hurt Josh Hutcherson. And the reason I picked this question is I think it's unfair. I really like the way he stepped up. I think what's hurt Josh Hutcherson is not only his being shorter than Jennifer Lawrence, but also poor writing in the first film. I mean, I think he really came across poorly. And, it was a little bit almost like Cyclops versus Wolverine in the X-Men movies. It's like, who would pick Cyclops over Wolverine? They didn't even give him a fighting chance. And I think that Peeta was Cyclopsed in the first Hunger Games film. But boy, did he step up to the plate as a character, and then also with Josh Hutcherson as an actor in Catching Fire. Suddenly, he became a viable love interest, at least in my opinion. I wonder how you guys feel. But for the first time, I guess that's supposed to be the point. Like Katniss, I was like, maybe there's something here. Maybe this guy would be a really good boyfriend. Although I know how it turns out. Okay, so some of you guys do as well. I cheated. I went on Wikipedia or the Hunger Games wiki. But anyway, I was really impressed with the work that he did in that film. And also, the other thing that really kind of started to make me a Josh Hutcherson fan was his stint on SNL. I don't know if any of you have seen it. If not, I think it's on Hulu, or you can find it on the SNL website. But he did a really good job with his characters. I think he really went for it. He didn't hold back. He did some great accents. There was my favorite sketch I really liked when he was in a veterinarian office. He did a great job there. And I really have a lot of respect for actors who don't take themselves too seriously, and he doesn't seem to be one of them. So he did a great job, and I really opened my eyes to his potential as an actor. But again, when you want to be a leading man, being short doesn't help. And it's funny because I said Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise is a very short individual. Well, for movie star standards, it's funny. Ben Stiller is also considered very short. And I was on the red carpet at the New York Film Festival for The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and he was down way at the end, with the still photographers. That's when they have all the light bulbs going off, and that's the section they do first on the red carpet. And the person next to me, another reporter, was like, "Wow, he is so short. Ben Stiller is so tiny." And I was like, "Yeah, he looks really short." And then when he worked his way down the press line, when he got to me and stood next to me, he was my height. So I would be considered. I'm 5'6", by the way. I would be considered very tiny also by Hollywood standards. And I think Tom Cruise is maybe an inch taller than myself and Ben Stiller. I think he's around 5'7". But anyway, he goes through quite an effort to make sure that he does not appear short in movies. For instance, there have been stories of them digging a ditch when he has to walk in a road. They dig a ditch for his leading lady to stand in. In single shots, he'll be on an apple box. They cheat with perspective. Tom Cruise is very sensitive. And also, he's become a big movie star, so he can make these kind of demands. But even in his personal life, for instance, Nicole Kidman has told many a story after she got divorced from Tom Cruise that she couldn't wear high heels the entire time they were married because she was already taller than him, and just to put high heels on top of it would have been too much. And I particularly bring that up because I think where it's been particularly embarrassing for Josh Hutcherson is on the red carpets for these Hunger Games films, where Liam Hemsworth is already huge, the actor who plays Gale. Then Jennifer Lawrence puts on high heels so she can look her best on the carpet, which I can understand. And so she then gets pretty close to Liam's height. And then you have poor little Josh Hutcherson, who looks really miniature next to the two of them. And he probably is not that small when you think of normal heights. But it's just, I think it's creating this, unfortunate situation for him where he has like leading man looks. Although based on SNL, I think he could do some character work, some comedy work, but he doesn't have the height of a leading man. So I think this is a problem for him. I hope he can overcome it. The Hunger Games is making so much money that maybe people will take a chance on him anyway. And also look at Elijah Wood. Maybe he should go call up Peter Jackson and say, do you need any more hobbits? Or dwarves. I think I'd be great. I think he would be good. But I'm rooting for Josh Hutcherson, particularly after seeing Catching Fire, and maybe more audience members are, and maybe more people in Hollywood are too. So I'm curious to how you guys feel. Is height a deal breaker for you in terms of a movie star? How do you view Josh Hutcherson? Do you view him as a leading man? Do you view him as a supporting? Do you view him as a non-starter? Have you not changed your mind about him? And how do you see him, and why do you think you see him that way? And did you see the SNL episode where he hosted? Write your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for your question, Neatsan. I hope the answer was helpful. And write down below what you think of today's top stories and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.